Good morning, everybody. I am Elisa Antileo. I work in Universidad de Santiago de Chile. I am a linguistician and I work with indigenous languages, especially with Mapudungun, Mapuche language. Also, I'm native speaker of this Mapudungun. I want to talk with you about indigenous language right in Chile. First, I want to speak about the oral tradition we call in Mapudungun, the creation of the Mapuche world. As you see in the picture, the Mapuche hearts have 4 parts: the Wenumapu, the Running Wenumapu, the Nagmapu, and Minche Mapu. From the beginning, for the Mapuche earth consisted of only the Wenumapu, the land from the sky. In the land from the sky, in the Wenumapu, there is a spiritual family. One old lady, one old man, a young woman, and a young boy. The old lady, she wanted to send people to the Nagmapu, but in the Wenumapu, there are positive and negative forces. Those forces fought each other, fall down to the Rainy Wenumapu, crossed the Nagmapu, and went to Minchemapu. Was very difficult for them to go out. First, one forces go out and formed the mountain, the volcanoes. And then the other force went out and formed the rain and the cloud. So the Nagmapu had mountain, volcano, fire, and water. Then the old lady sent the young lady, Calfuwenu Ilcha. Calfuwenu Ilcha walked in Nagmapu with bleeding feet because there are a lot of stones. From that blood grew up the flowers, grass, small animals, and birds. That is, the Nagmapu has sounds, colors, life. Then the old lady sent the young man, and there was a couple of human beings in Nagmapu. The old lady gave them a mission to take care of themselves, take care of the family, pray for the nature, don't forget the spiritual origin, and use the Mapudungun. We still keep that mission. We still pray for nature, and we are fighting to recover our language. We are going to speak about Mapuche territory, philosophy, history, language, state policy, and speak about some point of conclusion. You see here 2 maps. You see Chile. The Mapuche people are in the central south part of Chile. We are also in Argentina. Historically, the Mapuche people from Chile go to Argentina, and then to Argentina go to Chile. It wasn't the mountain, Andes mountain wasn't a problem. Remember the tale that I told you, the volcano was one of the first force that form our territory. How many indigenous people are there in Chile? We are 9 different groups. Aymara, Quechua, Coya, Licanantay, Rapa Nui, Diayita, Mapuche, Selkman, Yagan, and Kewashka. Not all of us have the alive languages. We have 4 living languages, Aymara, Quechua, Rapa Nui, and Mapudungun. We have language extremely asterisk, Selkman, Yagan, and Kewashka. We have people that lost their language, Licanantay, Coya, and Diayita. According to the last census, we are 2,185,792 inhabitants, which correspond close to the 13% of the Chilean total population. The main group are the Mapuche, which constitute the 90% of the indigenous group. Indigenous culture are very diverse because depend on the territory. And as you see, there are people from the Andes, from the desert, Atacama Desert, Easter Island, Central South, and from the Patagonia. The territory is different, so the culture is different between us. The Mapuche, we are in the 9th region. That territory was called Araucanía by the non-Mapuche people. Here I show you a figure to explain the Mapuche philosophy. In the center of the figure, there is the Azmapu. Azmapu has 2 branches. One is Normongen and the other is Azmongen. Inside the Normongen, there are rules for living, rules that guide the relationship between men and women, human being and nature. Everything is ruled. Inside the Azmongen, there are knowledge, values, experience, the reality, the real world. The Azmapu principle is to keep the balance between human beings and nature. When you keep the balance, you have kumemonyen. You have a good life. On the contrary, unbalance gives disease problem. So that is very important for the Mapuche to keep the balance between people and nature. Also to take care of ourselves and take care of the nature. The traditional education is inside the community, inside the family, inside the traditional family. Elders teach to children values, knowledge, oral tradition, and traditional education is not inside the school. The school is white culture, white language. Most of the Mapuche keep the traditional religion, ceremony to lands. We also have traditional medicine based on natural plants and natural energy. Today, the 10% of the Mapuche people speak the Mapudungun. We have a big problem of writing Mapudungun because we have 3 different alphabets, and those give to the children confusing. We also have close to 200 writers and poets that use writing Mapudungun, and that is very important because they are promoting writing culture. Mapuche demands include self-determination, territory, right for language, for culture, women voice, identities, and also to keep our philosophy, to keep our Mapu. There is the picture here. It was March, October 12, 2020, to commemorate the day when the Spaniard, the resistance of the indigenous people. And that picture is from here in Santiago. Santiago de Chile, the capital of this country. The history of the Mapuche people. We have our Mapuche nation, which is called Guaymapu. It is situated, I told you, at the central south part of Chile. In our language is Ngulumapu, and in Argentina is the Puelmapu. During the period of conquest with the Spanish conquest, the Mapuche used to sign treaties. Those treaties helped to the Mapuche to live a period of peace, to keep the freedom and keep the territories. And also the language was very powerful from the north to the south. When the Spaniards come into the Mapuche community, they need to bring interpreters because the official language was the Mapudungun at that time. Mapuche people defend the sovereignty. Also, Mapuche people, we are not warriors people. We were very spiritual person. And also we used the words to sign treaties. That was very important. But at the second half of the 19th century, the Mapuche people were a victim of military campaigns from Argentina and Chilean states. Chilean army used the military forces to kill the Mapuche, to burn the house. So Mapuche, we were not prepared as warriors to fought against them. After that, the colonizer, European settled colonizer, occupied the Mapuche lands too, according with the Chilean law. The Chilean policy confiscated the Mapuche land and put the Mapuche into reservation. This process implied the racial subordination of the Mapuche people, and also Chilean state and Chilean law was introduced into the Mapuche territory, also for the Mapuche people. They impoverished cultural and political oppression. The Chilean state promotes one language, one culture for one nation, and they denied the Mapuche language and all of the indigenous language too. At that time, when the Chilean Creole gained the independence from Spain, it was in 1810, but it was in 1862, in the mid-19th century, when the Chilean occupied and incorporated the Mapuche into the Chilean state. they called that process as pacificación of the Araucanía, pacification of the Araucanía, but it was a war, it was occupation, military occupation for us. Chilean government used colonial discourses, positivism and social Darwinism to call primitive to the Mapuche people, which represented the Mapuche people as an inferior race who created obstacles for the future of the state and the nation that the Creoles planned to build. The government gave to the Mapuche the título de merced, a small piece of land, legal, but all of the land used the government and the colonizer. The Chilean political elite introduced the discourse of civilization and progress, which was transmitted through writing and policy. They occupy the territory because of in the name of civilization and in the name of progress, and because the Mapuche were not civilized person. So by using colonial violence and structural racism, Chilean state reduced the Mapuche language, the Mapudungun, and Mapuche knowledge, the Kimun, to minority status. Also use institutions to destroy and subordinate people and families in what we call civilizing space. These institutions were schools, missions, large landed states, the army, which introduced the racial colonial design and development of the state and society of Chile. Now I'm going to speak about the Mapudungun. Poetry is the deep murmur of the murdered, the rumor of leaves in the fall, the sorrow for the boy who preserved the tongue but has lost the soul. Poetry, poetry, is a gesture, a landscape, your eyes and my eyes, girl ears, heard the same music. And I say no more because no one will find the key that no one has lost. That poem belonged to the Elicura Chihuahua. The poem name is The Key That No One Has Lost. Elicura is Chilean National Prize of Literature 2020. He is a Mapuche poet. I'm going to tell you why the poet, Elicura, speak about the boy who preserved the tongue but has lost the soul. The school banned the Mapuche language and culture. Teacher washes the children's mouths with soap when they spoke their mother tongue. They hit them with a rod. They made them kneel on stones and vegetable seeds. So as adults, they stopped teaching their tongue to children. It's one example of how we lost the language. Spanish still the language of the Chilean school. Mapudungun is not an official language, not used widely in school. Colonialism and racism destroy the Mapuche soul. And this is very hard for us. Intercultural bilingual education. There is a legal framework, but it is a more symbolic than a practice school for that respect the indigenous language and culture. We have an indigenous law from 1993, Children's Rights Convention, Article 30, that speak about the right of children to receive a language and culture from their parents, but here is education doesn't respect it. ILO Convention also speak about the right of the children for language and culture. We have the General Education Law that establishes interculturality as a principle and give way to the subject of indigenous language. We have academies of indigenous language in Aymara, Rapa Nui, and Quechua. And we have also for the Mapuche, we have 5 academic, but they are not academic. They don't plan in the language for the normalized language. We also have a law against discrimination, but there is no constitutional recognition of indigenous people. We are not recognized by the Constitution, and whenever we want, we claim for our rights, there is nothing to support us. There is no language right law that protects language and the speakers. The intercultural program, it is just a symbolic program because it's not a system of education, it's just one subject. But not all the indigenous students receive that subject because the school need the presence of 20% of indigenous inside the classroom. But for instance, here in Santiago, the majority of the indigenous people live here in Santiago. The 70% of indigenous people is here, but the concentration of the indigenous inside the school is not, is very low. So there is no possibility to receive the subject of indigenous language. Also, the racism system is very hard. They used to speak about the Indian as lazy, drunk, and wild. The mass media referred to the Mapuche as terrorists because the Mapuche claim for land and self-determination. Also, the intercultural system need a common system for indigenous and non-indigenous. White people must be intercultural too, because they need to respect the Mapuche, and if they need to respect the Mapuche, they need to know the Mapuche. Today they fear us because they don't know us. So there is not an interculturality system in education. It is just a symbol. And that is a very, it's not good for the Mapuche people because we are losing culture and language. So what is going on inside the intercultural school in the Mapuche community? We have a big problem with the special educational needs system. Most of the indigenous people inside the community were diagnosed with special educational needs. That's mean to have problems, mental problems, learning problems, language problems. The 70% of the total indigenous population was diagnosed with these special educational needs. And 18% of the Mapuche people. Non-indigenous people with this problem, the percentage is 10% of non-indigenous people. So we think that this is a linguicism program because the test use the Spanish language and use the Spanish culture to diagnose the indigenous people. And not all of the indigenous people know the Spanish language as well as to give a good test. Or also rural culture is very different to urban culture, and the test speak about the urban culture. So that is the school integration program policy. They have a decree, 170 decree. In the Article 33, describe diagnostic criteria for language disorder traits. And that will likely manifest in the speech of bilingual people. But the bilingualism is not a disease. They said that the children that have that problem have word production errors, inability to use speech, produce sounds appropriately for their age, very limited vocabulary, making mistake in verb tense, or experiencing difficulties in memorizing words or producing sentences of your own length or complexity, the developmental level of the child. Expressive language difficulties significantly interfere with learning and communicative interaction. Those problems belong to bilingual children who are learning a second language, but that is not a disease. So those diagnoses is big problem for the indigenous student, because they receive a special program in order to correct the sounds. Those sounds belong to the Aboriginal language, and the school is pushing them to leave the languages, the Aboriginal languages. The professional who diagnostic the student, they are not Mapuche, they don't speak the language, they don't know the culture, because the university do not train them in the indigenous culture. All the tests are in Spanish, and it's very for the children, they don't speak and they don't know that urban culture that use the test. In conclusion, Chile has a multicultural policy and political system as opposed to an intercultural system. It does not recognize indigenous rights for language, culture, territory, self-determination, or identity. There are no Mapuche decisions from Mapuche agenda, including in the government, which consists mainly of white and economic political elite politicians who decide for the Mapuche. That is very hard for us, because if we want to make something different, we need to ask them if white people approve, we can go on in our agenda. But most of the time, they don't recognize the rights. So this is why we are in problem today. Racism is found inside the curricula and therefore inside the school. Prejudice, stereotypes, exclusion of traditional knowledge from teaching, which inhibit dialogue between different culture and knowledge. There is no dialogue between culture inside the school or also inside the society. Mapuche identity, culture, and language are disappearing due to racism and discrimination because of the nation state policy. Mapuche philosophy is still in people, lives because of traditional education, orality, oral tradition, and communitarian way of life, and the relation with the nature, and the knowledge about the Mapu. So Mapuche language is unique in the continent. Its loss will be the death of a unique civilization. But Mapuche people say, meanwhile we are alive, language lives inside our body and flows in our veins and breathe. We just need opportunities to speak a language in society. We need new language policy inside Chilean country. I hope you understand my speech. My main purpose was share with you the situation of the Mapuche people and the importance for our society and for our humanity to keep the diversity, cultural diversity, also language diversity. One language teach you other philosophy, other point of view to understand the world, the development, the relation of the human being with the nature. And I think that the Mapuche culture is very strong in its philosophy. And for us will be very important to share our knowledge with the Chilean society and also with the other society from other continent too. Thank you very much. Goodbye.